Venri Chapter 18. Meanwhile, in a firefight. Damn it, Shepard, that's the second time! Stop shooting at me! Sorry! You have new armor. You look like a bad guy. So you're saying that all these years you were just mostly shooting at not blue? Apparently, yes. I like black and red now. I'll make a note of it. I'd understand if there were smoke. I said I was sorry. Timeline. Priority. Surkesh. Shepard. Moram had selected Edie as a teammate for this mission because it had been advertised as more diplomacy, less shooting. Turned out it was a few lectures, then a bomb, and then shooting, and then more shooting on different levels of the complex. Rex had better appreciate this. She yelled out over the gunfire. Doing okay, Edie? How's your first shakedown run going? Excellent. My targeting is listing slightly to the left by a few microns. I can fix that when I am not under fire. She's not allowed to replace me, Shepard. Microns. There's some bullshit right there. It is an assessment of intended sighting, not results. I wanted to go a little easier on you, but this is what it's like. Having reviewed mission recordings exhaustively, I don't believe that this comes as a surprise to anyone. I've been counting. Over the years, there have been 20 missions that were intended to be peaceful. Only 4 of them actually turned out that way. If you count all the missions that we didn't realize we were getting into until we got there, that makes for some grim stats. Statistics of death are 15 on this mission that we have encountered. Oh, now wait, this sounds like fun. A fatality calculator. A fatality calculator that generates fatalities. An abacus of death. However you want to process it, let's move up. Bigger and better things will try to kill us. She wasn't wrong. As Edie counted her abacus through a few more waves, there was an atlas. She'd been trying something but hadn't gotten it right yet. She'd had way too much fun with the atlas at Grissom Academy to let this go. She claimed the target as her own, and Garrus and Edie gave her covering fire. She very patiently shot out the glass of the hood with her pistol and then drilled the driver in the head, trying to do enough damage to kill the pilot, but not the craft. When she saw the pilot was down, she shouted a whoop and then vaulted over cover and headed for the atlas. She heard Garrus yell, "Oh, come on now! What the fuck?" Edie was still covering and made no comment. She yanked the driver's body out, saying, "Yes!" Then, as an aside that she expected to be obeyed, "You guys might want to get down, please?" Garrus and Edie immediately ducked behind cover, and Shepard aimed the atlas away from them and started picking off gunmen with glee. Once she had better confidence in the controls, she said, "Okay, guys, I am reasonably assured I won't actually hit you. You can come out and play." "The hood's gone, Moram, you dumbass. They can still shoot you." "They can try." "Oh, hey, look, he's trying." She aimed at a straggler, and he exploded in a satisfying pink cloud. "Who's a dumbass now?" "You are!" There weren't many people left, so she could only play for so long before she ran out of targets. She climbed back down, patted the flank of the atlas, saying, "I want one so bad." Yeah, she'd been shot. No huge deal. She was shot all the time. This was totally worth it. They hadn't hit her. It had just ricocheted around the cab a bit and carved a track into her wrist. Garrus pulled out some Metagel and applied it to her arm, giving her a look. She beamed at him. "You're jealous, aren't you?" "A little." "You want me to save the next one for you?" "Yeah." "I promise. Next one is yours. I'll give you covering fire." You are so good to me. In the shuttle on the way back, things were crowded. A female Krogan, Morden, Rex, Edie, Garrus, and herself. She was still pretty riled from the Atlas thing. Garrus saying, "Did you know you can actually shoot those shield guys through the slot they look through?" "No way. I'm trying that next." "Let's see if you can hit the broadside of a shield." Shepard deliberately fell for this setup. "Funny. I know I can." Dramatic pause. Realization. "Hey!" Garrus smiled at her after a brief laugh, and then they fell silent. Morden and the Krogan were talking, but she wasn't close enough to be a part of the conversation, and she didn't want to shout. She'd be able to talk to them on board when there was plenty of time. She leaned her head back and started to hum, and then started to sing. A new song that had been stuck in her head. She didn't know much in the way of the lyrics yet, so she ended up repeating the same line over and over, under her breath. Edie was sitting next to her, and she started singing along, in harmony with the lyrics. Shepard's eyebrows shot up, and she stopped singing, and Edie stopped singing with her. "No! Do it! Sing!" Edie quirked a brow, but continued on from where she'd stopped. Morham's eyes went wide. "Did you know that before I started singing?" "No, but finding a particular tune is not a difficult search." "Okay, try this one." She sang a verse of an older song, a year back, not a human composer, but Asari. By the start of the first chorus, Edie was singing along in harmony. Morham was delighted as she said, "Okay, now this." She sang a few lead-ups to a Gregorian chant, and Edie picked it up. Morham tried to sing around wanting to laugh and smile, and she only made it so far before she grabbed Edie by the face, kissing her cheek soundly. "Edie, you are my new best friend." Garrus shrugged. Edie said, "Thank you, Commander?" "Yes, thank you. We must do this more often." As Morham and Garrus walked to a meal together, he seemed to suddenly remember something, saying, "Hey, I was talking to Vega and he said you punched him." "I did. He asked me to dance. He punched back." "I'm crushed. What about us?" "I remember a spar happening. You still haven't asked me to dance." Garrus stopped and took her by the shoulder, pressed her against the hallway wall. "I can't believe you punched another guy, but not me." "I could punch you right now if you want. Where do you want it? Try to make it something that won't break my hand." Garrus put his hands against the wall above her shoulders, leaning down, so she had to tilt her head up. "Vega thinks we should spar. You know, a friendly, ship-wide community." Her stomach tilted at his voice, his arms, and his eyes. "Vega, huh? This is for his benefit?" He leaned down to breathe in her ear. "I can make it official if you'd like. Spar with me." Liara walked by, shaking her head, saying, "You guys have a room for that." Morham looked at her, smiled, and said, "Someone's always watching, T'Soni. It might as well be you." Liara laughed and kept walking until she was out of sight. Morham tilted her ear up to him again. "You were saying?" He nuzzled at her hair, took her earlobe gently between his teeth, and said, "Spar with me." Her spine melted, but agreeing might make him stop touching her. "You sure you want me out there causing mayhem and damage?" "We have lots of mayhem and damage. We don't need to make Dr. Shakwas's job harder. Garrus breathed in her ear. Come on, Shepard. I'll do anything you want. She tilted her head down. His use of the names he had for her gave away an awful lot about the man. He wasn't asking as a mate, but as a crewmate, she said. You already do anything I want. He didn't disagree, and the soft laugh he made sounded like he was appropriately taking it as praise. She did love his Taurian sense of service. Please beat me up. I'm asking nicely. She smiled again and chose to answer not as a crewmate, but a lover. Yes, my dearest love, the mate of my heart and my home. If you want me to beat you up, I will beat you up. He pulled back suddenly. Really? You will? Yes, really. I thought you didn't want to blunt your murderous edge. Yeah, well, a lesson in caution and ass-kickery could be of use to the crew. My crew will be here, right? Not kidnapped to motivate me? I should be able to shift gears with only a few minor trips to the medbay. Wait, me going to the medbay, not you going to the medbay, right? It's sparring, Garrus. We'll both go, no doubt. I'll carry you. Not if your leg's broken. He kissed her, and then took her hand, and they continued to walk to the mess. Vega was there eating. When he saw them both, he caught Garrus's attention. Hey, is she gonna do the thing? Morm's eyebrows went up as Garrus said, She's gonna do the thing. Traynor looked up with a perplexed look. She's gonna do what thing? Garrus. The thing was arranged. The shuttle bay was a mass of people. It had turned into a spectator event. It had been scheduled and then rescheduled, and people had tried to alter their shifts to attend. They had promised that if it went well, they'd make it a regular thing. Everyone could participate. That was a welcome promise. They'd follow up on different shifts, on different days, to give everyone a chance to watch or take their own chances. He couldn't blame anyone for wanting to be there. No doubt everyone had seen Shepard in action on a vid or in a training exercise, but being on the Normandy and seeing it firsthand was a different matter. There was a festival atmosphere. It had required makeshift bleachers to be set up on the sidelines because there were too many people to be able to see over each other's heads. There were snack tables. There had been 3 distinct Normandy crews, and he'd been a part of them all. The first crew had been fledgling, desperate, and struggling to become a team. The second crew had been secretive, eclectic, and riotous. If the first crew of the Normandy had been a hidden weapon and the second crew had been a shiv in the dark, this crew was a shining blade in a deliberate spotlight, intended to rend and inspire. She was the glittering edge of that weapon and the hand that held it. People here wanted to be a part of that, dedicated themselves to that. This crew was new, but was composed of experienced leaders in their areas of expertise. Moram watched for indoctrination, but she was less concerned about that than she had been under Cerberus. Moram had decided that although indoctrination was a horror, it also robbed the indoctrinated of originality and the guile to hide their own indoctrination. It was a powerful thing to destroy someone's sense of self-preservation, and it resulted in a flawed tactician. Husks would never retreat. Knowing when to retreat was key to war, and so many paths of strategy were blocked off to them. Actions would be taken to oppose them, and they were the actions they would take every day. She saw it as a flaw in a process intended as action from a distance. Too much sameness. She'd met Saren after his indoctrination had already taken place, but watching the elusive man slowly deteriorate over time had given her a first-hand view of the process. If his indoctrination was unmistakable, other indoctrinations would follow that pattern. Indoctrination was a blind process. Garrus was not sure he agreed, and he wasn't sure she was just putting a brave face on it. He watched for indoctrination himself, but he was less sure he could spot it. Her capacity for tracking patterns of behavior gave her an edge, but he wasn't confident that edge provided as much protection as she thought it did. Moram saw the value to this exhibition, or she wouldn't have agreed. She may not personally value her notoriety, but if it would help with morale, she would use it. He was going to make the most of it. She wouldn't have agreed to it if he hadn't asked, and that burned in his heart. Something about her unpredictability made it impossible for him to take giving of herself at his request for granted. Not when it was for public consumption. Sexually, she would and had given him everything, always. There was no demand he had made that she had not fulfilled. She had successfully turned him into an unrepentant deviant. Not only did he want a human until his body burned, but he wanted to dominate his superior officer. Now she was his bondmate and Ava. She was his law in all things. He could contrast that with the years of being in her shadow, wanting nothing more than that right if that was all she could give. Seeing Thane had brought that contrast out. He felt he couldn't lose. He wanted to dominate her. He wanted to be dominated by her. He wanted to watch the fire light her eyes. He wanted to invoke lust. He wanted to watch her try to hide it. He wanted to see her glittering edge shine, and he wanted her to cut him with it. He just hoped she didn't break a bone. Not hers. His were fine. And she could break both of Vega's legs, if that helped. He liked James, recognized him as someone he respected, but he'd be fine with it if Moram at least dislocated his shoulder for him. Break him down, Lola. Let me watch. Sparring on a Taurian vessel had so many meanings that it lacked for humans. Combat was space for meritocracy, with rank theoretically gone. In practice, it didn't always work out that way, because Taurian status and socialization would often lead to lower-ranking officers allowing higher-ranking officers to win regardless of merit or skill. There was fear on both sides. Fear of the superior officer being humiliated, fear of the subordinate officer experiencing professional retaliation. That differential between Taurian culture and Taurian practice is what had driven him from CSEC. He had no patience with Taurians who rang the bell of their own culture to gain status and then skipped out when the bill came due. He'd appreciated in Moram, as an officer, as a person, as a human with no legacy to uphold, that she'd created a legacy for herself. She always paid the bill. Never rang the bell except as a teaching tool. She was always willing to allow the meritocracy to dictate outcome. She'd allow those who volunteered, Vega, Javik, Garrus, and Edie, to beat the hell out of her. She'd suppress her own instincts and her biotics. She could turn them all into paste. He'd let them beat her if they earned it. She was capable of doing what Taurian politics and theory dictated, but didn't often produce. Real leadership, not just the name of a leader. Maybe he was a good Taurian after all. If the old Primarch made a clan for her, he must have been onto something. The new Primarch was on this ship. They'd wondered how to organize this circus with 5 volunteers. A few themes arose. Garrus versus Javik, Shepard versus Edie, Shepard versus James. He had no idea what Javik's style in the ring would actually be, so he'd take the first hit, go from there and see if Moram should risk it. Shepard versus Edie was an unknown. Garrus had no idea how to go after Edie without doing serious physical harm to her, and how to go about that was still unknown. Shepard versus James because James wanted it that way, and it was his idea, so he demanded a finder's fee. She'd given it to him. Sudden death. It would still possibly result in an uneven match if Javik, Edie, and James won. Then it should be Javik versus James, Edie versus Garrus to put him back in rotation. If Garrus won, and Moram won both of hers, it would be them at the end. Moram stepped out on the set of mats. "Can you guys hear me back there?" There were a few adjustments until she was loud enough. "All right, bloodthirsty people." There was a pause for laughter. "We're about to beat the hell out of each other for your entertainment. Do not tell me how much money you lost on me. It's rude. Your future children need an education. It's selfish of you to make me responsible for their ignorance." More scattered laughter. Joker called out, "Hey, Shepard, who do you think's gonna win?" "In accordance with Alliance Protocol, I'm compelled by law to say I will win." Okay. Who scares you the most? "Well, I've seen all of these excellent people in a fight. They all scare me. But I'm concerned about Edie electrocuting her skin at a critical moment and me losing control of bodily functions." She turned to Edie, gave her a beseeching look, and said, "That was a joke." After laughter died down, she continued, "Normandy bloodbath will be distinct for not having enough blood to bathe in. You in the front row are probably only at risk for far-ranging sweat. This is an exhibition and a study in cross-species, interspecies, and synthetic combat methods. I'm sure this isn't how Javik would have done it in his cycle." "The front row would be in danger of extermination." "Of course they would be, and I am glad I am not on that ship. The rules are, this is a hand-to-hand exhibition, no freaky inherent powers or biotics. We avoid the face and we avoid the throat. This is sudden death. First fall wins a match. Limbs are at risk, and some enthusiasm resulting in broken bones and wrenched joints is to be expected. That is not an invitation, Javik. We wish to be entertaining. We do not wish to overtax the medbay." Dr. Shakwa said, "Thank you, Shepard," with a smile. Javik made a disgusted noise that conveyed his dislike of the convention. Moram continued, "Dedication to combat means that we fight hurt often. Sometimes we fight while debilitated, and we do it to save lives, our own and those of others. Everyone here gets that, or they wouldn't be here. Here we go." That was Garrus's cue. He'd volunteered to go first with Javik. As menacing as Javik was, he relied in combat on biotics, and he was much smaller. Javik and Moram were the same height, eye to eye, and only Javik's forehead crest gave him greater imposing height. Garrus had a crest of his own. Garrus had a great deal more experience recently with hand-to-hand, and his reach was greater. He'd heard enough about how to prepare a Turian for dinner that this would be fun. Javik wasn't a pushover. Nobody here was, but Garrus was confident, having traveled with Javik for long enough to have a sense of his style. Javik was the essence of war for his people, but Garrus had grown to think he was the essence of command in war. He was not a scrapper. Intimidation was the height of strategy in Javik's time, and domination was the goal. He lacked subtlety and versatility. Garrus began with a ring stance, and they circled. Javik had expressions that were difficult to read, so he was not going to try. Javik was also at a huge disadvantage, not having warmed up, not having sparred previously, and not knowing what to expect at all. Garrus waited until Javik tried a few test jabs, and Garrus distracted him with a few jabs aimed at the face, intended to startle and distract. Very fast, not intending to land. With Javik backing up, Garrus dropped his upper body down and used his head at Javik's hip, hand outside at a knee and hand inside at a foot, controlling his leg, lifting Javik off the ground as he scrambled to regain his balance. Garrus gave him a moment to feel the loss of control and then pivoted, driving Javik's hip to the ground. Javik seemed to respect the rules of no face hits, had time only to attempt to find purchase with his hands on Garrus's back before gravity threw him back. First fall. Deceptively fast. That made him happy. Better yet, no injury. Garrus wasn't big with overt celebrations, so he walked off the mats casually and leaned up against a wall to watch the next match. Okay, maybe that was an overt celebration in his way. Javik muttered but didn't protest, stood and acknowledged the loss with a nod and went back to sit with the spectators, to clapping. Maybe he'd learned something. Next was Moram and Edie. Joker whooped the loudest as they came out onto the mat. Edie was enthusiastic, but tentative. Moram echoed her tentative style, actively making herself look a shade pathetic and apprehensive. Not too much, just enough. Edie had a blend of styles. She seemed to be choosing from multiple disciplines. Showing off? She was fast. It could have been intimidating. Moram let her do it. Garrus felt something he hadn't expected to feel, but it was gratifying. Sympathy. She's fucking with you, Edie. Garrus tried not to smile. Moram backed away with a hint of startled worry in her eyes when Edie began to get a bit more speed. She's still fucking with you, Edie. She's fucking with everyone here. Moram put on a show, landing test hits that Garrus noted looked clumsy but were aimed at seams in Edie's construction. No obvious effect. Edie hadn't landed a punch, having enjoyed just backing Moram around for a while. Right there with you, Edie. Moram had a sense of show, so she didn't want it to end too fast. That's what he was getting. She let Edie knock her around a few times, taking hits, but only when Edie was aiming at something insignificant. Upper arms, chest, avoiding the collarbone. Nobody else here had seen Moram in the ring, much less been on the other side of that bluff. Garrus flicked an eye to James, who was watching impassively, getting his own assessments of Moram. Liara should have known better, but she wasn't giving anything away either. Garrus looked closer and saw that her mouth showed subtle amusement. Liara did know better. She'd been in her head. What he would give to have that opportunity. With the same distraction and baiting Moram had used on Garrus, playing out in its infinite varieties, she got Edie to lean forward a little too far, which must have been what she was waiting for. It was very fast. He had no doubt most people couldn't even follow what she did. Moram rushed into Edie, hooking her left elbow through Edie's left elbow, using that momentum to spin Edie around and keep her off balance. Moram continued through to grab Edie's right arm and pull back until she hooked her elbow through again, locking Edie's arms behind her back, simultaneously jumping up and landing her knees on Edie's lower back until she drove her into the mat, face down. It would have broken a human's spine, but Edie was unharmed. She protected Edie from jamming her own appendages in a rough fall or using her hands to prevent the fall from happening. There was a general gasp and an outcry of appreciation, and Joker specifically saying, "Oh, holy shit," while Trainer fanned him with a datapad. James was grinning. Liara was laughing. Garrus finally let the smile touch his lips. That's my girl. Moram held her down for only a few seconds and then let her up, saying, "Thanks for not electrocuting me. We should work on getting you some experience You'll get much better. Well, you're built for aesthetics and not necessarily combat. Joker added, Yeah, she is. Which is okay, because theoretically, so am I. Garrus laughed. Edie nodded and went back to sit next to Joker, who took her hand and asked her if she was okay, and didn't let it go. That was going to be fun. Moram stayed on the mat, and James walked out, saying, I'm built for combat. You okay? Need a drink of water or something? Yeah, that'd be nice, thanks. Gonna get it for me? James rolled his eyes and then made a show of lifting a flask from a pants leg, taking a swig and offering it to her. She shrugged, took a swig herself, and then handed it back politely. Garrus straightened a little from his slouch. This he needed to watch carefully, because either Moram won, which he'd like to see, or Garrus got to kick James's ass in a little bit, which he would also love. There was no losing with this. They arranged to start the round. Predictably, James had a strength, and he was going to play to it. Power. He had a lot of power for a human. Moram didn't advertise her upgrades, and she'd spent a great deal of time making sure she was highly trained, knew how to use her implants to her best advantage. She had a lot of perks from that training that put her on the same playing field as far as power went. She couldn't actively use biotics, but it still boosted her inherent stamina, her ability to take a hit, and beyond that, she had the best Cerberus had to offer to a resurrected mascot. She had that, even if she couldn't rope James into a misstep. James charged for her, and she chose to step out of the way at the point of his charge where he couldn't change direction. She got a dig in at his ribs as he went by. A gasp from the crowd, some jeering from Cortez. Come on, Vega! There's a beer in it for you! James thought better of a second blind rush, though Garrus would have liked to have seen it again. Moram could have tripped him the first time and ended it, and James knew it. She was gonna do the thing. She gave away tricks one by one, and he bet James was wondering how many she still had left. Enough. She has enough. She has enough to kick your ass and my ass and everybody sitting down here, and look like she's got nothing left until she does. Moram had a good view of Garrus's impassive form waiting for the next round, whoever it was. She always started around facing him, just one more sign that whenever possible, her eyes would be on him. She'd given him some glances and signals others couldn't interpret. Garrus didn't call out encouragement to her, not wanting to distract her. He also didn't do what he wanted to do, which was to perform a rush of his own and carry her off that mat. Hell, he wasn't shy. He wouldn't mind staying on that mat. He'd better keep that last bit to himself. James didn't have many fallback tricks, so he was doing an impatient circle around her while she was smooth. James was primarily a boxer who relied on power, which could get him very far in battle when he didn't have to pull punches. He was used to aiming for the face. Garrus didn't think she was going to go for things like breaking toes, but that would probably be the fastest, inside-the-rules way to hamper his power and maneuverability. Would she do it? Was that initial jab enough to break his ribs? Unlike Javik or Edie, Moram probably knew James wanted to be special, wanted a scar, wanted to be able to tell people in a bar. See, this is from the time I sparred with Commander Shepard. She couldn't give him a scar on the face because of the rules. Pity. James would have liked that. Garrus carried his own mark associated with her. He'd resisted having it fixed, despite Dr. Shakwa's offering. Not only were scars Turian marks of valor, but this was her scar. Vega moved in for some punches, and they were well aimed, landing a few, and Garrus couldn't tell if she wanted it that way or not. Vega was much more confident than Edie, and he was faster. He was much more accurate, aiming to do harm to vital places. Vega was doing what you should do, Aim for behind your target. When he hit her ribs, it looked like he was aiming for her spine and something stopped him. Something made of person. That definitely had to hurt. Moore moved in while James was pulling back from a fast swing, and she hit him 4 times to his 1. She used fists, followed up with elbows and shoulders and her knees and feet, a barrage. It didn't all land solidly, but some of them were solid enough that Vega danced back, cursing and favoring his right leg. She'd slammed his knee. Garrus also suspected she did actually break his ribs, and he was favoring the double hit spot now, his elbow hanging back to protect it. The look on Vega's face was a thin veneer of pain over excitement and a little bit of bliss. Beneath all that bluster was a true Shepard fan. Good. His respect for Vega went up a notch. Moram gave him time to recover and make a face, which is more than Garrus would have done. She gave him a nod to go ahead, and Vega shrugged it off, heading in for a faster barrage. Her style changed again, avoiding and blocking the punches and getting behind him, aiming for kidneys and the same spot in the ribs. He was protecting his ribs, so she didn't land that one, but she got in a kidney punch. He fell to one knee, but miraculously kept his balance and fended her off from that position until he could drag himself back up and start over. He kept advancing, she kept finishing the round and giving him a breather. They were both smiling in that vicious way unique to fighting rings. Chin down, eyes overshadowed, sweat on the lip. Vega still had a slight limp, and he still protected his ribs. They were battering at each other, and Vega lost his balance slightly, miscalculated where she was going to be, and ended up accidentally headbutting her on the lips. Blood. Blood on her face. Vega pulled back, saying, Hey, no way. Accident. Sorry, Lola. Accident, I swear. She laughed, backed off like he did, flicked the blood onto the mat and said, Sure thing. I believe you. Too sloppy to be on purpose. You're breaking my heart. No, I think I'm kicking your ass. Yeah, that too. Garrus was experiencing a slow saturation of something he hadn't expected. He'd seen Moram beaten up any number of times, and her blood was something he'd become accustomed to. He really wanted to break Vega's nose. He could have sworn Vega almost looked his way too, but he kept his eyes on Moram, mostly, making sure she really was okay with what could look like an intentional rule break. Vega would have happily punched her in the face if it was allowed. His distress was because it was an accident. A dereliction of duty. Garrus was a professional, and he could keep his cool and not stride out there and do it right now, but he was sure he was going to do it. His eyes shifted from watching Moram to watching Vega, who was saying, Come on, Lola, just one punch to the mouth. I'll stand still. I don't need to. Please don't stand still. I prefer a moving target. Vega looked miserable, cast a glance Garrus's way, and shrugged. All right. Here we go. Vega's heart wasn't in it. He was shaken and done, and Moram could tell in seconds. She feinted toward his ribs again and then followed up with a monster kick to the solar plexus, and Vega was down. Garrus signaled that he would be right back to Moram, who helped Vega up, and there was applause. Garrus went to the side table and got Moram a bottle of water and brought it to her. On his way back to her, Vega stood in his path and said, Come on. Do it. Garrus narrowed his eyes. I was thinking nose. Oh, come on, just the mouth. Noses hurt like a bitch. Try not to break teeth. Square. You know I didn't do it on purpose, right? Garrus tilted his head and smashed a closed fist into Vega's lips, avoiding breaking teeth but still eliciting some colorful swears. Yeah, I do. Great. Thanks. He moved out of Garrus's way. Garrus brought Moram the bottle of water, and she took a sip. Thank you. What the hell was that? Garrus said, Turian thing. Well, Vega said, guy thing. Am I allowed to do a human-woman thing and think this is some bullshit? Garrus shrugged. You can. Not much I can do about it. Vega said, it's about you, but it's not about you. You don't have to worry about it. Garrus shrugged again. He did ask you to hit him. He just had to move on to the next taker. So you're both happy with this outcome? Garrus and Vega said variations of more or less, and yeah. Okay then. I'm glad you're happy with your service. Vega, thank you for sparring. Vega laughed and rubbed at his mouth, waved, and limped back to get his own bottle of water. You still want to do this? I can tell you're injured. That's the whole fight-hurt thing. It's not bad. Not bad enough to stop, anyway. I promised you I'd beat you up. So you did. All right. You need painkillers first? Oh, hell no. Bad idea. I won't be able to remember what hurt. I will. Of course you will. You're still the best painkiller I know. Eventually. Eventually. Yeah, let's do this. My love, would you care to dance? He took her hand and kissed the back of it. Something he'd seen during his research on human customs. Something that made her eyes go wide. He couldn't resist touching his tongue to the back of her hand and seeing a shock of warmth in her eyes. Good custom. Keep that one. He gestured for her to take her place on the mat, and she did, turning to face him. He looked at her and just enjoyed the moment. I got her here. He realized he had no actual idea what he was going to do or whether or not he wanted to win. It would be gallant, wouldn't it? Kiss the lady's hand, let her win? Nah, fuck that. He'd be gallant later. She was already tired. She was already hurt. Bruised, if not broken, left ribs. She had a slight limp on her right that she was hiding, but no doubt she knew he knew. He'd honor her sense of show. He smiled at her, and she smiled back. He'd give a show, but he wouldn't slow down for spectators. People could watch it in slow motion if they wanted to. From what he could hear, all the spectators were cheering for her. In his way, he was too. In the spirit of exhibition, he started to move in the same cyclic testing opening that was as traditional as the first move in chess. She circled away from him, but she didn't need to do any testing, as they had the first time they'd fought. She didn't have her fight game face on. She looked like this was relaxed fun. Despite her injuries, he didn't doubt it was. They tightened the circle by moving incrementally until they were within his reach. He made the first move with a controlled lunge, ever wary of his own balance. She was barely in range, and he expected her to not be there when his hands reached her, and he wasn't wrong. There were oohs and ahs and gasps from the crowd as they moved. Crowd sounds melded into percussion additions to the movement. This was nice, but this was like having dinner in a restaurant. She was aware of everything, the crowd, the atmosphere, the sense of show. He knew what he wanted to do. No, Bakan, look at me. Just me. Be aware of me and have nothing else for the crowd. He set about doing that, limbs blurring and no time to think, only time to react. Blow, counter move, counter move, start over, blow, and counter. He couldn't bring himself to truly hit her where he knew it would hurt the most. He wouldn't shatter a collarbone or punch at her breasts, but ribs were fair game. So were her hips, so was her waist. He didn't gut punch her because her whole stomach area upset him. It was so vulnerable. She could tell he was holding back. She ducked an intended blow and then swung both hands together against a natural rift in plating over his ribs with a nasty crack. The crowd gasped or cheered, and then he stepped back, tilted his head, and she gave a slight nod. Well. Ow. He almost growled. At least her attention was entirely on him now. He knew he'd better watch his fucking knees. She'd injured him where she was injured, and she was going to even up the score before moving forward. He asked her, "Still got bones in your hands?" They were bleeding, and she was laughing. She wasn't hiding the lust in her eyes as she said, "Maybe a few." She charged at him, and the look in her eyes and her speed made his heart drop and his spine start to vibrate with the rise of lust and possessiveness. She was definitely going for his knee. He managed to get out of her way and protected his knee, but she wasn't just going for his knee. While he avoided her kick, her fist caught him in the abdominal plates. More ow. She was bent over from aiming, so he shoved down on her back. It might have been over right then, but she staggered and regained her balance, circling back around to face him as he realized he was not getting out of this without a limp. He was lucky, again, that Taurian arousal wasn't physically evident. Human female arousal was clear in her eyes. He'd already gotten everything out of this he wanted to get, and he didn't actually care about the ending. What did she want? He watched her guard her vitals, even though she knew he wasn't going to hit her there. It was still the right thing to do. She knew she had fewer choices than he did, but she'd made the best one she could. She wanted him to do his best. She was moving from straight punching to more attempts to throw him, but she stepped over, jumped over, or avoided entirely. Leg sweeps and more double-handed swings. She had her own sense of honor and was avoiding the places she knew could bring him down. In this case, waist and the spots on his back she'd marked their first time. His best still involved not maiming her, and so did hers. Instead, he turned it more into a dance, tempering power with grace. He started at her speed, avoiding where she was hitting, and then sped up incrementally over time, slowly getting faster than he thought she could go. He could land blows she didn't see coming. He was sure they hurt, but they weren't debilitating. It wasn't all that easy, but it was easier for him than for her. She was tiring, landing fewer blows, making small losses in commitment and execution. She was breathing hard, grunting, sweating. That limp was becoming more apparent, and she was still going for his knee. He had her several times, had her vulnerable and seconds from taking that fall. She lunged for him, and he was out of her way, but had her by the waist, pulling her hard against him. Entirely unnecessary for combat, but it felt too good to pass up. His arms were vibrating with the force he could exert on her frame, the feel of the impact of her against his chest. Savoring that feeling cost him his knee as she kicked back and finally connected, and the groan he gave resounded in her ears. He let her go before she resorted to stomping on his feet. Somewhere in the turn of his intent, the audience had grown quieter, and there was no more rooting for Shepard. If anybody in the audience was convinced he couldn't kick her ass in seconds, there was a fitting human phrase. He had a bridge he could sell them in Cyprotine. The show was now him and her, together. The fact that she kept coming anyway, hurt, exhausted, and smiling, enjoying it, enjoying him. The fact that he kept avoiding her while taking opportunities to touch her. She was getting tired, and her hands were visibly trembling. From her eyes, half lust and half exhaustion. Time to end it. Sweat was obscuring her vision. He wanted to lick it off her, but when was that not the case? He charged at her, as he had done before in their prior fight. He lifted her off the ground, trapping her arms at her sides, and then spun around in the air, landing on his back. Technically, she won. By all measures he valued, she won. There was a cheer as the crowd realized he'd conceded. All he could see was her. He'd made sure they were eye to eye. You fucking cheater. She struggled until he let her hands free, which he didn't really want to do. She slid her knees to the sides of his body, leaned forward and kissed him, his arms coming around her neck, her hair curtaining around them. She was breathing hard. She smelled of sweat and a thin, strong spike of lust. The sound of the crowd was some surprise, but no shock. Enough people had caught them in embraces in hallways or staircases or elevators, so this was not a shock to anyone. Diana Allers had told her story. The kiss hadn't made it onto the news, and neither did the Battle of Hokey Pokey, but the bonding was announced officially to the Alliance. He imagined eyes on them, jealous or wistful or approving. He tasted her blood on her lips, touched his tongue lingeringly on the broken spot, felt the jolt down her spine through his arms. He felt like dying right here would be an excellent end to a life. Life goal. Achieved. He got to dance with her on Palaven before witnesses. He got her to not kill him before the Alliance. It was not a short kiss. He already wanted to roll her over and fuck her until they made a dent in the floor through the mats. She was using her tongue and moving her hips in ways that made him tighten his arms and pull her closer. She pulled back reluctantly. Other people. He brought a hand to her face and stroked a lock of hair behind her ears. Right. Other people. Someday we need to do this in a locked room. He had a new life goal. Deal. She stood up, offering him her hand. He took it, and she helped pull him up. There were congratulations and handshaking, and people who did that got more Shepard sweat and blood on them. Her hands were torn up. Dr. Shakwas approached and congratulated them both equally, then asked if she could be of any service. Moram looked at him, and he looked at her, and they both said, "No," in unison. Dr. Shakwas shook her head. Fine. You can both come to me separately later, if needed. I know better than to try to convince you now. We have huge stocks of Metagel. I imagine you need them. Anyway, congratulations again to you both. Thank you for no actual broken bones that anybody is admitting to. Mission accomplished. Show provided. He stood slightly behind her, nearly close enough for her shoulder to touch his chest. His face effectively stopped anybody else from approaching her until she noticed, turned, and said, "You're looming." He agreed with a nod. All right. Come on. Let's go get a shower. He followed her, but didn't agree about the shower. He was just going to show her. He liked showing her. She leaned back against him in the elevator ride, still too long. He kept his hands off her with an effort until they were through the door to their cabin. Once the pneumatic lock had sounded, he turned her and pressed her body against the door with his own. His hands were free, and he absorbed her surprised but gratified, low laugh. He lifted the hair from the back of her neck with a hand that guided her head to the side while he licked there on her wet skin, still hot from exertion, with her pulse pounding enough to feel it on his tongue. He let out a long, vibrating groan of pleasure that he knew she could feel through her back. His sternum blade had been retracted for battle, but the edge still fit her spine. He told her, "I have a few questions." Really? This is a talking thing? Doesn't feel like a talking thing. She pushed her body back against him while her hands came up to press flat against the door at the level of her head as if to surrender. He nuzzled at her neck and dragged his teeth across her skin to elicit a shiver, and then said, I can multitask. Talking thing. Okay. I was wondering. And now I want to know if you know how much lust you inspire in those who see you fight like that. She was still, lines of tension materializing under her skin, a breath drawn in, until she forced herself to relax. He said, Uh-huh. I see it. You can't fail to see it. You don't acknowledge it, same as you didn't with me. I've never met anybody who didn't use that much power to their advantage. She had relaxed, but was on her guard again, and her words were easy. Who says I don't? The only man I wanted, not even in my league or my species, and I'm lucky enough to have him pushing me up against a door asking embarrassing questions? I'm not getting that shower, am I? He laughed and massaged one of her breasts with a hand, gathering a heartfelt moan. Then he asked, A league? What's a league? And no, shower is getting further and further away. You will eventually get one, but not right now. Not with the way you feel and taste and smell. I'm so glad we're doing this sparring thing. Answer the question. He worked at the back of her throat, fluttering his mandible against her skin, dragging his teeth. That is nice. A league is... It's hard to concentrate. He didn't let up. A league is comparing ability or capacity. So a sports team might be amateur, minor, or major. As far as... Oh, right there. Yes, so I figure I'm an amateur, and you're major league. He laughed and let the sound vibrate down her spine, moving back to directly over the bones. She made a little sound of pleasure, and then he said, Oh, that is so much bullshit. Do you buy your own bullshit? You're an amateur? You and I may have different... please don't stop. Standards in a mate. I think I'm pretty sure you just talked me into letting you beat me up and then proceeding to dance me around as though I were standing still. And I clearly like it. He smiled against her skin and dragged his plates over the slopes of her shoulders. Yes, you like it. I am trying to figure out why. Are you proud of me? Are you proud of yourself? Do you feel an audience watching? Feeling jealous? Feeling inadequate? That's a lot of questions. Try going slower for the circumstantially simple-minded. Let me put it in Shepard terms. Give me numbers. Percentage of audience sexually frustrated by the spectacle of us fighting. She closed her eyes and took a few moments to calculate while his hands were on her. 64%. Your numbers are honest. I should have figured that out earlier. Let me see. She gasped at the feel of his hand on her breast. You might be overthinking this one. Here's one for you. Odds of invoking lust or other related positive feelings by touching me? Violently or otherwise? He smiled and spent long moments with his tongue on her skin, and then said, 100%. 100%. But that doesn't explain why you'd do it in front of witnesses, considering the risk of injury and loss. She laughed and even blushed. You touch me and I win, and it makes you not happy, but another word makes you Turian. And me, human. He considered losing himself in the access to her body, her thoughts, and he decided it was true. She allowed his Turian sense of status to contrast with her human sense of camaraderie. They could have both. She didn't need to invoke or use sexuality in the way he would. His breath hitched and he pressed closer to her, his cock pressing against her ass, and he started riding her slowly, steadily, through restraining fabric, the wet sweat on her shorts causing the fabric to stick to her skin. He pulled a long groan from her that faded into a steady rise and fall of her voice with his motions. And he asked her, "Would you let me fuck you, Morin? In front of a crowd? Purely for morale, of course." I think that's against regs. He dug his fingers deeper into her breast and wrenched another groan from her, pressing harder. "It isn't a request from me or a promise from you. It's a simple question. Yes or no. I know you will allow your very status-conscious, prideful, and lustful Turian bondmate to beat you down until you are exhausted and trembling. Would you allow me to slice your clothes off you? Slide my hands over your body? Would you allow me to lick between your thighs until you forgot your name? Would you allow me to drive my very Turian cock into your very human body until you lost consciousness from reverie, and I brought you back over and over? Would you allow me to thrust my cock into you in a human way until you wished you could lose consciousness? If you could, would you give me that?" "Yes." The quiet, unqualified admission set off trembles in his knees, and he kissed up her spine until he leaned his crest against the side of her head. "Spirits begone." He held her, breathing in the scent of her hair, the heat sheeting off her body. "Then you should know when we do this again, I want to render you helpless, immobile, or thrashing under me. When your mind calculates all those speculative looks, you should know I take fierce pride in who you are to everyone, who you are to me, and how there is a relentless beat of constant need that burns for you. I can barely see a surface in my environment where I don't imagine what it would be like to have you pressed against it. You make me ostentatiously proud to be yours." She had relaxed entirely back against him, as much contact as their bodies could make as she asked, "Why did you bust Vega's lip open?" He gathered his thoughts, distracted by her, as distracted as he wanted to make her. He asked a question back, stalling for time. Maybe he'd show her. He'd try. "You mean the guy thing?" "You said it was a Turian thing." He smiled against her skin. "It is. Vega understands. I like him." "This is not helping me understand." It is a few things. I could give you a few reasons, and I'll do that, and then I'll show you why. His hands shifted on her body, and he backed up a few inches. Here, let's trade places, see how that goes, but first... He turned her to face him, drawing himself up to full height, looking down at her. This is looming. As you've noticed, I can protect you with my body, guard you with my presence, even keep people from talking to you. I am imposing. He turned them so his back was to the door, saying, "It doesn't matter what position we're in. You will always be smaller. Nobody will ever look at us together and feel sympathy for me. Every single person out there was rooting for you. Why? Yes, you are Commander Shepard, and they are dedicated to you, but I have a clear advantage. You were bleeding, limping." He got distracted and leaned forward to kiss her again, tongue running over the swelling curve of injured lip. He pulled back and stroked fingers over her cheekbones. You died, Venri. You are vulnerable. You work harder than anybody I know to overcome those vulnerabilities, and you are formidable, but you are vulnerable. That's what people see when they look at you, especially when they look at us. You don't have my strength, speed, armor, or height. Now, normally, if someone hits you, I can just shoot them. It's simple. Someone does you harm, I do them harm. When we get into sparring, though, it gets more complicated. Someone does you harm, but you consent to that harm. You didn't consent to having your lip split open. But it was an accident. I know that. You know that. Yes, but it doesn't matter. It was out of bounds harm. I couldn't shoot him, but I did want to break his nose. I wanted to do more harm than he did to you. He asked me to settle for even. He would have accepted if I broke his nose. He didn't want to do you out of bounds harm. He knew I considered it my right to protect you or avenge you, and he didn't want me to wait for my opportunity or resent him. You wouldn't. I don't know about that. Not to interfere with a mission, but maybe an accidental shove with an elbow. He'd be looking for it. I'd be looking for it. But you guys are civilized. Grown-ups. It's not about civilization or maturity. It's something that stirs in the base of the brain. Whether or not Vega is in love with you, he's been in love with someone. He's also dedicated his life to protecting people. He recognizes it in me. That's how it's not about you, but would be true for his ideal mate. It's how his mind works, the right he'd expect. The right to have a say about what might happen to her. He'd know I see you at your most vulnerable moments. And I'm allowed to take advantage of them, but nobody else is. He's seen us together. This is less voluntary than you think. You have attracted people who admire you, who love you. He said this, thinking of Thane but unwilling to break his confidence. People who see you on a vid may not get that you're as vulnerable as you are. People that see you bleeding and limping while you laugh and go on to the next round have a different perspective. Your vulnerability elicits desire, loyalty, and protectiveness in those who are capable of giving that to you. I promise you, James would jump on a grenade intended for you and consider it a good death. It is not necessarily about sexuality, but enough of the time that adds just a little more sharpness to the urge to do what I get to do daily. I am your husband. I am your second in command. I have the right to have your back. You chose that. I can beat you down or raise you up because you want me to. So for the demonstration, take off your shirt. She did, simply and easily because he wanted her to, and that shuddered through his spine. Her skin was bruised and broken worse than usual because of the lack of armor. She had a particular bloom of ugly in the middle of her ribcage on the left. He ran his fingers over the unbruised, unbroken areas of her skin and watched goosebumps raise. He moved his mouth close to her ear. I can have anything I want of you, Venri. Pressure from my hands on your shoulders, and you're sucking on cock with contentment and joy and a pounding warmth in your bloodstream you crave. I could lift you off your feet until your legs wrap around me and I sink into your heat until I hear you wail. You've granted me power over your body, over your life. There's no way I'm not taking advantage of that every second. Sometimes I don't understand why you don't. You could beat me in a fight by asking. You could slam me against a wall with biotics. You never do. So here's where the base of the brain has nothing to do with civilization. You seem to be a person of general desires, overarching ideas. But for most of us, desire isn't general, it's specific. I've seen you break the fingers of someone just for touching your ass. You've done it countless times, fended people off from your body, but you can't keep them from thinking about it. People are going to think about you very specifically. He moved his body along with his words, moved her where he'd imagined. Don't you think? He turned her around again, took her hands and pressed them against the door with his own. Keep them there. Then he pulled her ass back against him, teasing her with fingertips through the fabric. The people have looked us up, have seen how we touch each other, have heard my name on your lips. How many bootleg copies? He unfurled claws and pulled a double track of lines down her back, over bruises, digging in until he reached her shorts and shredded them off. If they haven't looked us up before, they'll be doing it tonight. His hands roamed over her. The fact that she was trembling fed that addiction sense of touching her, that he'd never get enough. He freed his cock suddenly and lifted her ass against him, angling her so the push down kept her arms against the wall with a little yelp from her. He positioned his cock against her, feeling the heat and gratifying wetness pooling there, with her trembling. He drove into her, losing interest in teasing, holding her suspended and ramming his length into her, forcing the pace of her breathing, with his hand coming around to press nearer and nearer to her clit, urging a fast, hard rip of pleasure through her. Combat definitely counted as foreplay. When her trembles turned into the tight squeeze of her orgasm, he held her hard against him, closing his eyes, reaching, moving inside her, pressing against the spots that caused her to spasm against him, around him, growling as he bent over her body and bit into the back of her neck. He lifted her, still joined, an arm around her waist, pulling her back against him, a hand at her throat. He was still careful of her ribs, though he knew she couldn't feel pain right now. She relaxed entirely in his arms, and he kissed at her skin until her breathing was steady. Garrus, the base of the brain thing. I understand. I do, but let me ask you something. Okay. If I'd asked you to not hit him, regardless of your opinion, your argument, or your intentions, would you refrain from hitting him? Yes. Just exactly how much power do you think I need? I've got you. Would you bite me, hit me, hurt me, if I asked you to stop? Of course I'd stop. And there you have it. All these things you can have from me, these are things I want. You may be status conscious, but I have the highest status you can get on this rig, plus I'm a Spectre to boot. I don't need to shoot for more. There is no more. Someone else doesn't have to lose for me to win. He made a face. Blasphemy. Human blasphemy and propaganda. I'll try to overlook it. Shower. Metagel. Please. He set about doing her bidding.